What's up, YouTubers? It's Ernie, Blerd Without Fear, and this week, and by the time this comes up, the week will probably have already passed because I'm just behind on a lot of stuff, but this week, I want to say it was the 10th, maybe the 9th of this month. It was the 10-year anniversary of Spider-Man Brand New Day. And that was a story arc that saw writer Dan Slott, who has been writing Amazing Spider-Man ever since. It also saw like a new status quo for Peter Parker. Peter Parker was kind of in the space where his life had progressed so much. He was, married to Mary Jane Watson, and I think even his powers had changed and mutated. He had all this stuff going on, and they wanted to get him back down to basics, and the way that they saw fit to do that was to embark on a story arc called One More Day, which involved Peter Parker, Mary Jane, a deal with Mephisto, and a lot of angry readers. It's funny because I think this was the most angry Spider-Man fans had been since the Clone Saga back in the 90s. But this was a return to form. Brand New Day was supposed to put Peter Parker back at square one, but also still keep the smarmy Peter Parker that we've grown to know and love. So before I jump into it though, let me know what comics you'd like to see me make a video on. Sound off in the comments. If this is your first time checking out my channel, consider clicking subscribe so you can become one of Earth's mightiest subscribers and tap that bell button so you know when I post up. Okay, Spider-Man Brand New Day. Let's jump in. Okay, so Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, Brand New Day by Dan Slott and Steve McNiven is a really interesting book because, once again, we talked about the status quo for Spider-Man, and the status quo is he's on the struggle bus. Now, let's go through some of the things that got retconned in the aftermath of One More Day. So, first things first, Peter Parker's secret identity is restored. No one knows who he really is. Not the Avengers, Daredevil, Mary Jane, Aunt May. No one knows he is Spider-Man. This was something that was done to counterbalance the events of Civil War, where Peter Parker famously revealed himself to the public, which was a big deal because Spider-Man never really gave up his secret identity. He guarded that thing probably more than almost any other superhero. Now, there's no more MJ, because reasons. Actually, more like because deal with Mephisto. There was a deal that was made to basically not necessarily say that they never met, but basically that they never got married. They got to that point where marriage was getting ready to happen. They actually got to the wedding day, and then just shenanigans, and they don't really tell you why at this point it didn't happen, but you just know they had a falling out and it's over. Peter Parker is back to being broke as a joke because, once again, he is on the struggle bus. This is the status quo for Spider-Man right now, and he's also back to web shooters now, which is a really cool change because I think by the time you got to One More Day, I think his powers had mutated where he actually did have organic web shooters, but I won't lie, I wasn't reading Amazing Spider-Man at that time, so you can flame me if you want, but honestly, I thought Spider-Man was kind of garbage for a period of time, roughly around the time of One More Day. So I didn't read him, and I just didn't care to go back. I've talked about the possibility of going back and doing a video on One More Day, but man, it ain't gonna happen anytime soon. Peter Parker's back to living with Aunt May, so that's a thing. He is also struggling to get work to the point that he can't find a job, and he ends up having to go back to what he knows, and that's the Daily Bugle. Harry Osborn is alive and well, despite being very dead a mere 2 or 3 months prior to this story arc. And Harry Osborn has no memory of his time as Green Goblin, though he does very clearly remember that he hates Spider-Man. And as a result of this, kind of speaking of Green Goblin, Gwen Stacy, still dead, and still thanks to the original recipe Green Goblin. So those are all the things that are still intact, the things that are still in play right now. Now, you're probably asking yourself, it's a brand new day, so what's the conflict? Well, the conflict is that Peter, in the very beginning of the story, gets mugged, and when it happens, he gets hit for his web shooter. The mugger just happens to see it and snatches it off him, thinking that it's a fancy wristwatch. It's not, but it's actually something far better. Now, one really important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about this mugger who hits up Spider-Man is the fact he wears a Spider-Man mask. And this is kind of the way that they keep the status quo for Spider-Man being a menace by having people loosely masquerading as him. And that kind of go back to explain why that's always been an issue for Spider-Man, kind of being, even though he is a popular character, why he is often treated as a criminal when he is actually a hero. But the thing that's kind of crazy about it is that the mugger figures out how to use the web shooter. So now he's committing more muggings with it. And what's worse, the guy who mugged him now knows what he has, and he's frantically trying to figure out who he actually stole it from because he doesn't remember. Because if he can figure it out, he will know the real true identity of Spider-Man. So now you see why this is such a big deal, because Spider-Man's, his identity has finally gotten restored. So it would be a big deal if some common criminal actually figured him out almost immediately after. And it would also kind of cheapen the blow on that whole Mary Jane thing. But the other conflict is that, and this isn't really so much a big deal, I'm only going to mention it because it's going to come up as a plot point later, is that J. Jonah Jameson, 3J, has a heart attack due to Peter laying into him. And the thing is, it's kind of messed up because when Peter does it, it's one of those moments where like you sit back and you're like, dude, yeah, let him have it. He deserves it. But when he finishes, it's like, oh man, you probably should have went easy on him. It's one of those things like you're conflicted. Like you believe and you feel that he should have lit into 3J. He should have done it years ago. But when he does it, it's almost too much. And he has a legitimate heart attack and he's out for most of the book. Now, the reason he goes off on Jonah is really understandable because basically Jonah's withholding his paycheck, and not because it's out of some sense of mean-spiritedness or anything like that. It's because there is a buyout, an impending buyout. He's trying to stop the buyout, and he's basically withholding everyone's pay so that they can try and stave that off. And everyone else is for the most part on board with it, but Peter is like, no, I got shit to do. I got plans for that money, and I need it right now. So that's why he goes off on 3J. But as a result of this leads to his wife selling the company to a guy by the name of Mr. Bennett. And when he does that, J. Jonah Jameson is out of the picture. One weird thing about this, and this is something that I'm just going to go ahead and spoil it right now, the new guy, they play him up to be kind of like another version of 3J, but the thing is, he's actually not. He's actually a much nicer person. He has a lot of J. Jonah Jameson's weird things that he does, like not being able to remember people's names and just seems kind of aloof, but nah, I mean, he's actually a much nicer person. Now, the other thing, this is the real deal, and what actually kind of sold me on this book is we get a new villain, and that is Mr. Negative. Some of you may already be familiar, or at least might be aware of who Mr. Negative is because of the Spider-Man video game that's coming out for PlayStation 4 this year at some point. This is where we get properly introduced to the character. So when you look at that trailer and go, oh man, I wonder who that new guy is, this is where he comes from. And I know it's a goofy name, it's a really dumb name, but the thing is, the guy is serious as a heart attack. Here's the deal. Mr. Negative is a character who, he's pretty much the up-and-coming crime boss. He's actually gone through and started up his own gang. He's taken out other gangs. He's got a real serious beef with the Magia family because of some shit that went down between them back in the day. You see, the man who would become Mr. Negative happened to fall prey to a criminal chemist by the name of Simon Marshall, who is developing this really crazy designer drug called D-Light. Sounds like a Kmart version of Sunny D or something like that. But anyways, that was basically being pimped out for the Magia, and they used it on runaways, illegal immigrants. So you kind of see where this comes in. And his character was technically an illegal immigrant. Trump wouldn't like that. But the thing is, this drug tended to have fatal results. This drug was highly unpredictable. Now, of the people who this drug was tested on, people who were kidnapped and forced into this, there were only 3 survivors. One of them being Cloak, the other being Dagger, and then the final being Mr. Negative. You're probably asking yourself, well, he was tested and he survived. Well, why is he Mr. Negative? I mean, what is he, emo or something? Well, the reason why is because he has control of both light and dark force energies. For those that aren't familiar, the dark force is literally energy derived from the dark dimension. Think Dormammu. Its power is so potent that being able to control the dark force energies means you're probably either from the dark dimension, you're a mutant, a supernatural being, or a human highly skilled in magic and the mystic arts. The light force is the opposite of the dark force in all aspects. Where the dark force corrupts and is comprised of negative energy, the light force is positive and heals and brightens, and it's like literally, if you look at the characters Cloak and Dagger, where Cloak controls darkness and shadows and dark energy, and Dagger controls light and, stuff like that. That's pretty much what it is, but just imagine Cloak and Dagger in one character. So when Spidey is tracking his mugger to get his web shooter back, he winds up running into the kidnappers, picking up a man who got a Spidey tracer accidentally shot onto him by the guy who mugged him in the first place. So it's kind of this weird happenstance, because Spidey's looking for the guy, he puts a tracer on, he just assumes it's the guy that he's looking for, but it's actually not. And this man is being kidnapped by Mr. Negative and his men, the Inner Demons. When Spidey crashes the party and meets Mr. Negative for the first time and discovers his plan is to use this Lemurian tablet, which is capable of invoking death and entropy, to pull a coup in the criminal underworld against the Magia. And on top of this, he also finds the man that he saw kidnapped hooked up to this machine, draining him of his blood. Mr. Negative doesn't even seem that bothered by the fact that Spider-Man shows up. Even when Spidey destroys the Lemurian tablet, he is so cool, calm, and collected that he just coyly reveals that I had a feeling that that tablet would get destroyed, so I took the precaution of writing everything down. And come to find out, the guy who was kidnapped and being bled dry was Bruno Carnelli, a ranking member of the Carnelli crime family, and a man who, according to Mr. Negative, is soon to become the head of both the Magia and Carnelli families because of basically what's going on with them is that due to marriage, the Carnelli and Magia families are technically like they're one family now. But Bruno isn't going to become the next head of the family, not because he's actually next in line, but because as Spider-Man and Bruno realize the only way it could happen is if everyone else in contention was dead, which happens to also be a part of Mr. Negative's plan. You see, when he had Bruno hooked up to all those tubes and was draining him of his blood, he did it for a reason. He was creating a special concoction also in tandem with that Lemurian tablet called Devil's Breath. So Spidey, realizing this, races to the Vandermeer Hotel to stop Mr. Negative and his men from pulling off this caper, but it's too late. The concoction they were brewing that is already unleashed, and as Spidey arrives, everyone begins to shrivel up and die, and Spidey seems to be affected by this formula as well. But fortunately, turns out the gas that's been killing the Magia and the Carnellis doesn't work on anyone who does not share their bloodline, as Spidey starts to recover and notices the hotel staff and even a random member of the family who isn't blood related are fine. And if you thought that was bad, the Carnelli and Magia wives and children were all sent off to the circus while the men of the family conducted business, and that's exactly where Mr. Negative is heading next with his special brew. Fortunately, Spidey gets there just in time to try and warn everyone in attendance, and he ends up banging some heads with the Inner Demons, and he gambles on using some bungee cords to fire the Devil's Breath gas canisters away from the kids, and the gamble pays off. But Negative got one of the children before Spidey could actually round everybody up, and he demands a transaction take place. Spider-Man's blood for the child's life. And he doesn't just want the blood to kill Spider-Man, but anyone he cares about, which oddly enough, this is actually a sure shot gamble because at the time, Spidey doesn't have any blood relatives, so it's actually like an easy bet. The only person that would actually hurt is him. Unfortunately, Negative doesn't entirely live up to his end of the bargain. He lets the kid go by flinging them like a rag doll into the river with zero effort, which is kind of their way of letting us know that this guy actually has more than just those dark force and light force powers at his disposal. He seems to also have some modicum of superhuman strength, because the way he tosses his kid is like, it's impressive. Like, even Spider-Man has to point this out. But in the end, Spidey saves the day, and the Magia now owe him a debt for putting them before his own. And this wouldn't be a Spidey book if Spider-Man actually had good luck, because we discover who Mr. Negative really is by the time we get halfway through Brand New Day, and it's not good for Peter. His secret identity is none other than Martin Lee, a man who is a well-known philanthropist in New York City, and also a man with ties to Aunt May, due to his creation of Feast, which is Food Emergency Aid, Shelter, and Training. It's basically a soup kitchen program that Aunt May has been moonlighting at since the beginning of this book, or since even before the beginning of this book. He was even the same guy who gives Peter a pair of shoes after he got hit for his web shooter. So there you have it. Martin Lee is a crime lord who doubles as a philanthropist, because, let's be honest, all the best villains do. And speaking of Spidey's mugger, Spidey finally catches up with him after he's been murdered by his fence for holding out on him. And of course, Spider-Man finds him as the police show up and witness him taking his spider tracer off the guy, who is now deceased. So now Spidey is a fugitive from justice yet again, another addition to the new status quo. And the book actually continues on. It actually doesn't end there, which I actually was kind of surprised by. Now, the rest of this arc in Brand New Day doesn't really pertain to Mr. Negative. It actually pertains to a new villain who is also on the rise, and also a new ally. You see, Spidey just can never catch a break, except for when he can. Peter's new boss, Mr. Bennett, is putting a $10,000 bounty out for pictures of Spider-Man. And of course, Peter's going to go for it, but unfortunately, this new guy doesn't operate like 3J does. He's actually, once again, as I said before, a nice guy, and he doesn't accept Peter's pictures because he points out to him that they're just not good. He points out all the things wrong with them. So this is another thing that Peter Parker has to deal with, because once again, he's broke and he can't even afford to get all the things, the materials he needs to make more web fluid. And this is also something, and I should have mentioned this earlier, because I didn't mention the web shooter missing. He's also low on web fluid, so he's actually not fighting at full strength this entire book. Now, the other problem is that there are new players in town. Even better, a new hero has showed up in town, a female hero by the name of Jackpot. And I know what you're thinking. When you look at her, she bears a very striking resemblance to a character very near and dear to Spidey fans. She even goes by a name very reminiscent of her catchphrase to Spider-Man: "You hit the jackpot, Tiger." If that's not enough, she consistently refers to Spidey as Tiger. So who is she? Spidey doesn't even seem to know, but he has his suspicions that she might be MJ, because we don't really know what MJ has been up to since the breakup. Like, they have not seen each other. Spider-Man and Jackpot wind up working together and make a fairly solid team until a random registered superhero shows up by the name of Blue Shield, who's kind of a no-namer. And Jackpot has to help this newbie turn Spider-Man in because she is registered, because we got to remember this is post-Civil War and the Superhero Registration Act is still a thing. She doesn't want to lose her license and risk going to prison for Spider-Man. And to be fair, it's hardly even a fight, because the only reason Blue Shield gets the drop on him is because Jackpot grabs Spidey from behind before he can even do anything. Now, just as they're about to unmask Spider-Man, Menace shows up. This is a new villain who just showed up into the Spider-Verse, and the encounter is brief, as Spidey quickly learns that this new goblin, this quotey fingers goblin, seems to have the original Green Goblin style of glider, as well as some form of electromagnetic shock ability, which is eerily similar to Electro. Now, strangely, Menace has no interest in Spider-Man, and only wounds him enough to give a warning to stay out of his way, and Menace leaves him alive. Of course, Spidey is worried his friend Harry may be up to his old tricks again, and checks in on him by speaking to Harry's new squeeze, Lily. Lily is a new character that was kind of added in, and they have some moments where they show, Harry Osborn trying to court Lily. Think of her as kind of an MJ type character, but she has no interest in Peter Parker. She is 100% all about that Harry Osborn. And it actually is kind of an interesting take, because it's one of the few interracial relationships you'll see in comics, in mainstream Marvel comics up to this point. She vouches that Harry was with her all night. Brown chicken, brown cow. So whoever this new goblin is, Harry ain't him. And Jackpot returns to Spidey's side later on in the next day, and she even apologizes for turning on Spider-Man, and they resume their impromptu partnership. Now, Spidey takes shots at guessing her secret identity, and she emphatically reveals she is not Mary Jane. She says her name is Sarah Ehret, and she has no reason to lie because, to be fair, her secret identity is a matter of public record now. So they discover that Menace is plotting to attack the Apollo Theater in Harlem. The only problem is they can't seem to figure out when or why. Now, with an assist from Betty Brant, Peter ends up getting a lead on who may have killed that mugger who stole his web shooter, a lead he's been trying to follow since he got pegged as the killer of the mugger who took the web shooter. Now, this leads to him reaching out to a guy by the name of Sergeant Pallone. And the news isn't good though. Not only have there been several of these killings, but Pallone wasn't entirely honest about their meeting being on the up and up. Pallone set him up and even has SWAT coming in to get him. And at this exact same time, Menace is attacking the Apollo Theater because, as it turns out, there's a political debate in progress, and Menace takes Councilwoman Paffrey hostage. Now, Spider-Man goes on the run from the Popo and gets an assist from Jackpot, but they know they won't get there in time on foot. So Spidey cuts a deal with the cops. He says, hey, you let me save the day, I let you arrest me. And of course, the police go for it. And Spider-Man gets there just in the nick of time to free the Councilwoman, who Spidey ends up hucking away from Menace while they're engaging in Mortal Kombat over the streets of New York. So Jackpot can make an amazing catch. She sets the Councilwoman down off to the side and tells her to stay put so she can rejoin the fight. And the first thing I thought when I read this was, I was like, that's odd, because the fight is over pretty quick. Spider-Man is handling Menace very well on his own. And when Jackpot comes back, Spider-Man is not interested in having her help because he starts to get this really bad feeling. And the reason why is because he's fought goblins before, and when he fights this goblin, he starts getting that old feeling again the moment that Gwen Stacy died, and past encounters with the goblin. Like, he's thinking back to every time he's ever went toe-to-toe with the Green Goblin and all the horrible things that have happened. Just as he's thinking this, Jackpot winds up knocking Menace away from his glider, and they bring him down to the ground. Unfortunately, that was part of the plan, and the glider swoops back and flies directly into the Councilwoman, literally impaling her, and Menace makes sure Spider-Man realizes that this death is on his head before disappearing. And Jackpot, she has a nervous breakdown, as one probably should when they end up kind of indirectly causing another person's death, and as the cops come in to arrest Spider-Man, he just takes off. Now, once the dust kind of settles, Peter ends up winning that bonus, which he only gets $2,000 out of it because with Menace showing up at the debate and because of, hey, camera phones, everyone else sent in pictures to Bennett as well, but Bennett honors the deal regardless. So that lets you know right there he's a stand-up dude, and it kind of gets rid of that weird. It's probably one of the few flaws in this book is that they try too hard to make him seem like he's not a good guy, and it turns out he actually is. It just, I don't know, it just seemed like unnecessary. But the real kicker is at the end of this, Spider-Man, because he wants to check up on Jackpot because of what happened, he actually looks up Sarah Ehret and he goes to find her. But when he gets to the house, it's not Jackpot. And at first he thinks, well, maybe she's playing coy about it, but the longer the conversation goes on, he realizes it's actually not Mary Jane, and it's not even the woman who he thought it was. It's not even Jackpot at all. Now, the funny thing about it is this actually is a woman who was once Jackpot. You see, once upon a time, Sarah Ehret actually was Jackpot, but she ended up passing the mantle over to another, but we don't know who she is. I mean, technically I do, but we're not going to talk about that here. I want to save that for when the reveal is actually revealed, because hey, you never know. Is it actually Mary Jane, or is it some other new identity? We'll just have to wait until a future video to find out. But anyways, that is the end of Brand New Day, or at least the first volume of Brand New Day. And like I said, this book is largely just meant to get Spider-Man back to status quo. And I mean, it was technically damage control because One More Day pissed off a lot of fans. And I mean, I think when I did the last video for The Birth of Venom Part 1, which Part 2 is something I'm working on right now, as well in tandem with this, I feel like I accidentally gave J. Michael Straczynski a little bit too much credit for the ending of One More Day. It was actually Joe Quesada who screwed the pooch on that one, but so yeah, Joe Quesada's the one who caught that body. This was basically damage control for that and making sure that Spider-Man was taken care of for the foreseeable future. And honestly, Dan Slott has not disappointed me in his writing for Spider-Man since this book came out. I mean, it's been 10 years strong, and Spider-Man is one of the better books Marvel has out right now. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, it's Spider-Man, Black Panther, and man, it's kind of light after that. I will say that there's a couple other books here and there kind of sprinkled through. Squirrel Girl's not bad. But I mean, as it stands, there's just not a lot of good books, but Spider-Man's one of them. But anyways, let me know what you thought about Brand New Day. Sound off in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. And if you want to see more awesome videos like this one, make sure you click subscribe so you can become one of Earth's mightiest subscribers and tap that bell button so you know when I post up. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you all next time. Plus Ultra.